I'm here fighting for women's rights and for women's equality.
The men have to be part of the solution.
Women are in the world, and we will not be bullied.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Tina Brown, and I could not be more delighted to welcome all of you back to Women in the World's Dallas Forum. It's hardly possible that a year has passed. And it's such an exciting time to be here because, I mean, nearly 5 million Texans have already cast early ballots. So this is a momentous night, though, at the eve of the midterms. And you're even more fired up than we are in New York, so it's very exciting. And of course, tonight there's that other epic battle, the Cowboys facing off against the Tennessee Titans. So I couldn't be more grateful that actually you're all here tonight to Women in the World. And after tomorrow's election, let's just hope that whoever comes out on top, there are more women in charge, okay? So, of course, we wouldn't be here at all without our loyal partners, our long-time presenting sponsor, Toyota, which has just moved here, its North American headquarters, to North Texas. The billion-dollar state-of-the-art headquarters that Texas is in now Toyota's in now is home to 4,000 employees. I'm so happy that Toyota's here in Texas, and thrilled to have them again as our partner as always. And I'd particularly like to thank my co-host, Lisa Matarazzo, who's Toyota's Vice President for Vehicle Marketing and Communications. Where are you, Lisa? I want to say hi to you and thank you. Thank you also to our supporting sponsor, AT&T, and our partner, Elevate. You make our Women in the World Roadshow possible, and we're so grateful. Thank you for your support. For those of you who haven't been with us before, let me just give you a little bit of background. Women in the World coming up to its 10th anniversary this spring, in April, at Lincoln Center in New York. Women in the World was founded by me to give voice to extraordinary female leaders, known and unknown, journalists, artists, activists, and businesswomen, and are all firebrands on the leading edge of change. So any of you who are heading to New York next spring, I do hope you'll come to our 10th anniversary at Lincoln Center, which is going to be epic. Since that time we founded it in 2009, we've expanded internationally and with exciting gatherings like these in various cities in the US. So tonight we have a wonderful lineup. First, 3 women who are the beating heart of the Democratic Party, including one who comes straight to us from the Beto O'Rourke campaign, followed by one of Dallas's most big-hearted businesswomen, one who figured out a way to provide a day of pure happiness to children in need, who I think is going to make you feel so, happy just to see her there. Next, a humanitarian hero, at a time when the detention of refugees, especially children, is so uppermost in our minds. You're going to hear from this very brave whistleblower who told the world about the shocking abuses of refugee children by Australia, not a place that you hear of a lot in the context of refugees. And we conclude with a literary icon who's lived a life of drama and passion, and who next week will receive one of our nation's highest literary honors. So there are 4 extraordinary programs tonight, and afterwards we'll go outside and talk about it and have a glass of wine and network. So it's going to be a wonderful, badass lineup, and let's roll. Thank you.
Are you ready to come to Congress with me? Now let's go get it done.
Doug Jones narrowly defeated Roy Moore.
As a black woman, I just have 2 things I want to say about last night's election. You're welcome.
Oh no, your back hurts?
Yeah, every black woman's back is hurting from carrying the election last night.
American women who gave so much to this Democratic Party, who never have a champion.
We watched that hearing, 21 members of the judiciary and only 3 women. So what could we really expect?
If someone doesn't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair.
Woo. Yeah. A well-deserved round of applause. Good evening, everyone. I'm journalist Caroline Modarressy-Tehrani, and I'm thrilled that we have 2 of the political power brokers that you just saw in that video with us on stage this evening. We have Minyon Moore, the former CEO of the Democratic National Committee. We also have Reverend Leah Daughtry, who twice served as the CEO of the Democratic National Convention, and they've co-authored a fantastic new book called For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Politics, which tells the story of their decades in the red-hot center of politics. So we also have here from Dallas a woman who I'm sure probably wouldn't mind following in their footsteps. Jara Butler, the former National Committee woman with the Texas Young Democrats, now the Political Outreach Director with the Beto for Texas campaign. So another round of applause to them, if you don't mind. So, Jara, I think I'm going to start with you because, you know, it is election eve, and I can just sense the tension in the room. So, what are the whispers inside the Beto campaign tonight? How are you feeling?
We're going to win. I think I'm encouraged by the number of young people who are showing up for this election. I think if anything comes out of 2018, it's the fact that young people have decided that they're going to stop allowing other people to make choices and decisions for them, and they're going to step up and start taking those roles and stepping up and making sure that they are represented and that their issues are heard and their issues are being heard at the ballot box. And I think that is the story of this election. And also, don't count us out. Don't count us out, because we will show up and show out every now and then.
Well, I mean, showing up, I mean, this is the story really of the last, you know, few decades in Democratic politics. You know, black women have been showing up. They showed up for Hillary Clinton. 98% of black women voted for Hillary in 2016. 94%, of course, voted for Doug Jones in that historic Senate race in Alabama. So, I mean, the Democratic Party, it seems to be, should be sort of returning the love in spades. Leah, what are you seeing from the Democratic Party?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. Black women are the largest and most consistent voting bloc in the nation, and we know that. We know how to size up a candidate, we know how to parse the issues, and we know how to go to the polls and not just take ourselves, but take our communities, our sororities, our churches, our neighborhoods, our girlfriends, whoever. We're going to drag you with us to the polls, and we're going to make sure you get there. And I think what we're seeing now is we've reached a zenith where we are requiring the Democratic Party to invest in us and in our communities and in our issues in the same manner in which we invest in the party. Sometimes they do a good job, and sometimes they could do a better job. But what you see from, as Jara said, is folks deciding, you know, if there's no seat at the table for me, I'm bringing in my folding chair. We've been at the table now many decades. We've been doing the spade work in really tilling the soil and uncovering new candidates. And what you have now are black women who are saying, I don't want to just be at the table. I want to be a decision maker at the table, and I want to chair the meeting. I don't want to just be in the meeting. So you have Stacey Abrams, you have Johanna Hayes in Connecticut, Lucy McBath in Georgia, Ilhan Omar in Minnesota. The list goes on and on and on. There are more than 500 black women running for office this cycle, and that's amazing.
That is amazing. And Minyon, do you feel like the Democratic Party kind of appreciate the work that black women have been putting into not only finding these, you know, very, very strong candidates, but then also rewarding, as you know, Leah was saying, the decades of hard work that black women really have been putting into building the Democratic Party?
Well, you know, I think we've all served in leadership positions in the Democratic National Committee, and a lot of it depends on who the chair is. and what he decides or she decides to invest in. And I think in this instance, black women and women in particular, I won't even just leave this to black women and women in particular decided that the party didn't have to give them permission to run. They decided they wanted to run, and that's why you see such an unprecedented number. I think what's happening with black women in particular, though, is we've always been comfortable just being the hidden figures, if you will. We'll work on behalf of these Democrats, we'll work and work and work, and we never expect anything. And I think 2016 was kind of a watershed moment for us. You know, when we saw that we came out for Hillary Clinton, 93%, and our white sisters, 43% of them came out for her, and then 57% came out for the other guy. And that to us just felt like, okay, we're just going to have to take this into our own hands. And if somebody else decides to come along with us, great. And we're hoping to change a few minds along the way, but we are trying to rally as many like-minded women as we can, and we see that every day now.
Yeah, I mean, Jara, do you see that? Do you think that as we come to 2020, we are going to see more young black women at the table and in leadership positions?
The way that I see it is that when it comes to being at the table, I shouldn't have to ask for a seat at the table that I helped to build.
Right.
A table that I helped to create. From our mother, Fannie Lou Hamer, who occupied the convention floor and said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. If you are a candidate, if you are anyone who is considered running, especially in this party that is supposed to be about inclusion and elevating everyone up, the expectation is you should have us at the table, and not just in a ceremonial role, but actually making decisions, because you can't talk to our community without us in the room. And you cannot reach us if we are not in the room. And I think that that is a message that I'm carrying myself, but my other sisters are carrying with me, because we're tired of holding it up and not seeing anything in return. And when it comes to how we do messaging, we can do a lot of different things, and we're no longer asking, we're just taking space.
That idea of taking space, I mean, without getting into the sort of nitty-gritty of party politics, because otherwise everyone will fall asleep. But the DNC, that there has been sort of a reckoning of sorts, Leah, right? The last couple of years in particular, May 2017, 24 black female leaders and activists, elected officials, wrote an open letter to the DNC, basically saying, look, there's too much at stake for the party to ignore them. What's changed since then? How have the DNC responded? Are you seeing them wising up beyond just tweeting, we got it, sure?
Or black women are leading the party.
Beyond a tweet, what's changed?
I don't know that much has changed inside the party. I think there is a cerebral understanding and an intellectual acknowledgement of the role and the import of African American women, women of color, women, period. But to your point about, you showed one of the chair's tweets about the importance of African American women. But in my mind, budgets are moral documents, and budgets also show what you care about. So until the budget matches the rhetoric, then that's all it is. It's just word noise. So I think what you're seeing now with all of these, with the groundswell of women who are running, is folks who are saying, we're not waiting for the party. We're Democrats because we believe in the values of the Democratic Party, not necessarily the institutional structures of the Democratic Party. So we're going to run as Democrats, and then we're going to change the party from the outside in.
I think that, people in the audience who may lean Democrat, I know everyone doesn't here, but for the people who do, what is at stake if the Democratic Party doesn't wise up to this? I mean, obviously we're coming out of one very stressful, contentious presidential election. We're heading into some contentious midterms by the sounds of things. What is at stake for 2020 if the Democratic Party, Minyon, don't actually wise up to the kinds of points that you're all bringing up?
You normally lose. Pretty simple. I mean, and I think at this point, I don't think we have to prove to the Democratic Party that we will show up. We just tend to show up because we know how much is at stake. Now, they can choose to invest so that we can show up in unprecedented numbers if they want, or they could choose to just, let it go by the sideline. But what we'll end up missing is young women like her. Because I think people like Leah and I and others will show up because we know that that is our civic responsibility and we want to do it. They tend to, they have a different metric sometimes, and we don't want them to stay at home. We don't want them second guessing that the party is for them. So it's important that they start doing more than symbolism. But again, I do think that it's going to be from the outside. I was looking at MSNBC just last week where there was 21 African American women that are coming into office out of Memphis. The party didn't recruit them. Some of them are judges, some of them are city councilors, but the party didn't recruit them. They recruited themselves. So I think, change doesn't start from up here. It really starts from the bottom up. And that's what we're seeing. Grassroots activists and organizers are now saying to the party, this is who we think we are. This is what we want to be. These are the values we have. We hope you will come along. If you don't, then we'll probably replace you too.
And Leah, in terms of the idea of grassroots activism, both you and Minyon were working alongside Reverend Jesse Jackson. Talk to us a little bit about how the influence of working with him and that kind of activism is still sort of translating to today and today's politics.
Mm-hmm. I first met Reverend Jackson when I was 6 years old, and he'd come to New York to work with my father on a economic boycott of a certain supermarket chain, which had some discriminatory hiring practices. So that was my first encounter with him. And through the years, I worked on his campaign in '84. And what I saw was, through him and through what I learned at my church, the integration of various means, various methods in order to achieve the same goal, which was to help communities prosper, to help people be able to have all the options available to them to take advantage of their talent, go as far as their talent would take them. And I think that sort of activism is really repeating itself these days. Black Lives Matter movement is not something new. It is a new name for an old movement, really. Because people have been killed by a police abuse of power for many years. So it's not a new thing, which, as they say, there's nothing new under the sun. So these are not new movements they're seeing. The trajectory of Reverend Jackson, however, put us African Americans, Latinos, people of goodwill, people who had never had the opportunity, put us in rooms that we didn't even know existed. When it came to the presidential campaign, we didn't know about conventions and, counting delegates and all of that. He opened that door for hundreds of political operatives. We're just two. Hundreds of people to cut their teeth on how policy is developed, how campaigns are developed, how you build coalitions, how you count delegates, how to count a vote count. Some people can't count votes. Reverend Jackson taught us how to do all of that. And so millions of people, lives were impacted, hundreds of thousands of people were elected. There was a whole tranche of black mayors who were elected in the aftermath of his campaign. Every major American city in this country wound up with an African American mayor based on the hundreds of thousands of people that he registered to vote. So he really laid a strong foundation for all of the activists, all of the electeds that came after him, because he taught us a new way.
And of course, all the way through to the first African American president,
yes, exactly.
Barack Obama in 2008.
Absolutely.
And I know, Minyon, it was a challenging time for you because you didn't actually put your weight behind President Obama or the then candidate Obama. You actually stumped for Hillary Clinton instead.
That's
so you talk a little bit about that in the book, but I'm going to make you rip off the Band-Aid in front of everybody here as well. So tell us a little bit about how challenging was that? I mean, just how agonizing was that decision for you in 2008?
It was really, it probably was one of those decisions that I just felt like, okay, you're either going to stand by what you believe or you're just going to, you're going to fall on the sword. And I knew President Obama. We were from the same hometown. I thought he was a delightful person. I thought he was a good person. I even thought in the back of my mind, if he ran a good campaign, he could potentially win. At the time, though, I was really hoping that America was ready for the first woman president. And I was just, that's where I was in my life, and I really wanted to put my weight behind it. I didn't feel like I worked against President Obama, I just felt like I worked for Hillary. And unfortunately, we fell short, but that's where I felt.
And you know, I mean, obviously, the sort of first woman is still eliding us all. Like, we haven't got there yet. But you know, Jara, from your perspective, obviously, is someone who's young and breathing life into the Democratic Party. You know, are you looking to female candidates for 2020? Is there anyone who's on your radar?
Right now, I'm focused on 2018, but I do have a couple of people in mind, because I look at 2016 and I reflect on it. We got so far, we got so close. I can't go back. You know, it's out there, and I think that women need to be in the conversation. You know, talking about the musical Hamilton. You know. We need to have representation, and if the highest glass ceiling is the White House, and we need to take a sledgehammer and break it, because Shirley Chisholm did it, and we had Hillary, Elizabeth Woodhull, but we've just never gotten there, and I want to see it in my lifetime. It's kind of like my grandmother told me when I was little, and looking at all the presidents, and I said, Granny, why aren't there any black presidents? And she said, I won't live to see it, but you will. Well, I don't want to have to tell my granddaughter that I won't live to see this. So that is my expectation, is that we look to have a serious female candidate in 2020.
And we've got some, oh no, go on.
You know, and I want to just say too that, I don't want people to get confused about us just feeling like we need a woman. We know that some woman out there is immensely qualified to do this job. She's probably even more, and President Obama would say it on the stump for Hillary. She is more qualified than any guy that has run for president. There's another woman out there that's more qualified. Well, it's not going to take much these days, but there's. Hope I didn't offend anybody, but there's a woman out there that has worked, that has earned the right to run, just because she is smart enough to do it, and she just happens to be a woman. But there is somebody out there, and we're going to keep the three of us.
Well, it might not be. We might not have to wait for 2020 for as you mentioned, these very, very qualified women who are amongst us right now as we sort of approach the midterms. I mean, we could see some political history being made tomorrow. Stacey Abrams, as you mentioned before, she could become the first black woman elected governor of any state ever, which in 2018 seems like quite something, not a good something. Jahana Hayes could become the first black woman sent to Congress by Connecticut or any New England state. And Ayanna Pressley could be the first black woman sent to Washington from Massachusetts. So, Minyon, what are your thoughts on these races? What do you find dynamic about these particular women, or why do you think they've kind of captured the national attention in the way that they have?
Well, first of all, they're smart as hell. I mean, seriously smart. I mean, we know them all personally. I mean, and we have had either dinner or lunch with one or the other. And I remember when we had dinner with Stacey, but she's razor sharp and so focused, and she so loves Georgia. But she also said that she was not going to run the same race. She was going to run a race that was different, because every time a Democrat has run this race, as we know, we've never won, but they've had this cookie-cutter model. So she began to build out her plan almost 4 years ago, and that's admirable, because a lot of times candidates get in a race and they just get in, and all of a sudden we're supposed to show up and vote for them, no plan. But she was very different. And then she understands the state because she was a minority leader. So that's her, and so I pray that, there's Georgians all across that state that will wake up and say she is the person to run that state. Ayanna was, she was a mentee of mine. She worked for Senator Kerry, and when she decided to run, the entire Congressional Black Caucus endorsed her opponent.
Wow.
But she kept going. I mean, she's smart, she's thoughtful. She was the first African-American woman to serve in the council there. and nothing changed her mind. You know, I think Jara was a little bit different. She was, you know, Teacher of the Year, which I found her fascinating because she just, you know, she was just dynamic and she loved kids, and every time she was on the stump, she was talking about children. And I think that captivated Connecticut. And so you'll see these three women who could ultimately end up being even in higher offices, because I just think that they are, you know, they are the type of leaders that whether you're black, white, or brown, you would want them to serve you.
Leah, what do you think? I mean, do you have anyone else that you're looking at as the landscape of 2018?
I like Lauren Underwood in Illinois. She's a nurse, and she just decided that she could do better than who held the office, and that she had ideas and she was ready to step forward. So I think she's going to do great in Illinois. Lucy McBath in Georgia. She lost her son, Jordan, to gun violence. And so her platform in Georgia is about safe guns, how you have gun violence prevention. And she's going to do great there. I'm fascinated about Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, who will be the first Somali American to become a member of Congress. She came to this country when she was 3 years old as a refugee. And now she's going to go to Congress. She's won the Democratic primary, which is all you need in Minnesota. And so we're going to have, thank God for Minnesota.
Right?
So she's going to come to Congress and be the first Somali American, the first Muslim American woman to be in the Congress. It's so exciting to see women stepping forward into new spaces. And we're going to have all this talent in the United States Congress, and it makes a difference when we're in the room about the issues and how they get discussed. I told somebody, until your feet are in some stirrups, you do not get to lecture me on well woman care.
Well woman care.
Well, I mean, that energy and excitement that you're talking about as well, it seems to be translating to the polls already, right? Jara, we've already seen huge voter turnout so far. You know, if turnout in Texas is as strong as it was in Alabama, I mean, you know, do you feel confident that tomorrow will go your way?
I feel confident just because I believe in my candidate, but I also believe in the people of Texas. But I also survived 2016. And the only poll that counts is on November's tomorrow.
That's right.
Facebook likes don't vote, Twitter doesn't vote, hashtags don't vote, the people vote. And so that is kind of what I'm looking at. But I, as a Texan, as someone who was born and raised here, what energizes me and what gives me great hope is the fact that people are actually taking active approach or not being apathetic. And I think we are proving that Texas is not necessarily a one-party state. We're just a non-voting state, and for this cycle, we're saying we're voting this year. And that, to me, is part of this victory. So the final poll will be tomorrow, but for the time being, I'm going to be working to make sure it happens.
Yeah. Minyon, what do you think? I mean, this early voter turnout, people are sort of clinging to it. Lots of people are very excited about the fact that it looks like there might be a blue wave. Are you confident that there will be?
Well, I'm a little gun shy, quite frankly, so I won't project the blue wave, but I will project the fact that I believe that Democrats have, you know, they have woken up. As the kids say, they are woke, and I believe they are woke, and I believe that they will be coming out. But more importantly, I believe that they've done what we didn't do in 2016 is they've gotten back down on the ground, and they're talking to voters, and they're going door to door. They're using not just technology, but they're actually using people skills to now communicate with voters. And I think we were shifting away from it a little bit because technology was becoming the end thing. So I feel more confident that we're doing the right things to have the blue wave.
All right, she's gun shy, but that was sort of hedging her bet, so
right.
We'll give you that. Well, we've run out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much again. A big round of applause, please, if you will, to Minyon, Leah, and Jara. Thank you so much. Thank you. And just a reminder as well that you can get copies of Minyon and Leah's book at the reception after the program at the end of the evening as well. But another round of applause for these living legends on stage with me this evening.
Here at the Birthday Party Project, we bring joy and magic to children experiencing homelessness. Every single month, we throw a big themed birthday bash, whether it is a county fair theme or it's Monster Mash with DJs. We want kids and families to experience something that they've never experienced before. We like to say that our parties are so much more than a celebration, that they are a loud exclamation point that children matter.
On your birthday, it's a very important thing to know that people are out there and supporting you. When I was in the homeless shelter, being a bit older than most kids who were there, I really understood the gravity of the situation. They give me a reason to keep going and try to make something out of myself bigger than what I've always known. I went from being homeless to studying computer science at Southern Methodist University.
So much of innovation happens at the ground level. When we start to impact our community, that's where the change really happens. And then it starts to build and grow from there. And how amazing is it that Toyota recognizes that too? I am proof that saying yes can create ripple effects far beyond our imaginations. And I'm so grateful for that.
A couple of you probably need some tissues for that tearjerker video. Rye, let's give that a round of applause.
I hadn't seen that yet.
It was beautiful. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alisha Laventure. I'm a local journalist here in DFW, and I am so pleased this evening to be speaking with Paige Chenault, this year's Mother of Invention. Congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank
and
you so
I mean,
much.
what an amazing concept. The Birthday Party Project, sort of honoring children, homeless children, with a birthday party. And it's such a simple concept, but the impact we see is far beyond simple. So I've actually had the pleasure of volunteering at one of these events. So I was so excited when I found out I would be speaking with you tonight. And I just want to start from the very beginning, understanding how you came up with this concept of honoring, of celebrating children who are homeless with a birthday party.
Absolutely. So I actually was a wedding planner here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for about a decade. Wow. I had the privilege of watching the most significant of celebrations unfold. And there's such magic in those moments when people come together to celebrate one another. I remember I was pregnant with my daughter, Lizzie, who was on this video, and I was on an airplane reading a magazine article about kids' birthday parties, so excited about using my gifts and talents, my resources, to throw her the best birthday parties ever. And so as I'm sitting here flipping through this magazine, looking at all these images of birthday parties, I put that one down and I pick up another article. And truly, as soon as I open the magazine, this image of a little boy just smacks me in the face. I was truly just frozen in that moment. And these words came over me. What about him?
What about that image made you feel that way?
So there's this little boy in Haiti, and he's standing in the middle of a dirty and crowded street. And there are people in the background of this image, and yet no one seemed to notice him. And he looked all alone in this world. And I just thought, someone has got to do something about this. I mean, here I am. I plan parties for a living. Someone has got to find a way to celebrate children that would otherwise not feel celebrated. And so that's really where the rumblings began.
And I mean, worlds apart too, but yet you're able to make that connection between your child and a child that you don't even know. So that's amazing. Let's talk about exactly how the Birthday Party Project works. What goes into these parties?
Absolutely. So we partner with homeless and transitional living facilities, not only here in Dallas-Fort Worth, but actually around the country.
Wow.
And every single month, we have birthday enthusiasts. That's what we like to call our volunteers. We have birthday enthusiasts join us and help us host these 1-hour celebrations. We celebrate all the kids that have a birthday that month. Okay. And then each of these birthday children receives a badge that says "My Birthday Rocks." They get a gift that's just for them, and a cake and a candle, of course, to make a wish and blow out their candles at the end of the night. So in addition to that, we invite all the other family members and kids that are staying at the agency to participate in the party. We believe in building community right there within those 4 walls. So we set up a big birthday party. It's always a big themed bash, superheroes or monster mashes. We have thankful parties, you name it, we've probably done it. We have a 1-hour celebration, and at the end, my favorite part is we get to line up all of our birthday kids and we call them by name. And as we call them by name, the room erupts in cheering and everyone goes crazy and we sing happy birthday, and then the children get to blow out the candles on their cake and open their presents.
Each child has their moment. That's
Absolutely.
beautiful. You know, I would imagine that you've been doing this for a very long time now. You've met some incredible kids, children who have probably touched your heart, who have probably really left a mark. And you mentioned candles. I understand among the many children you've met, there was one little girl in particular who didn't even understand how birthday candles work. Tell us about her.
That's right. So we have the privilege of celebrating children that are fleeing domestic violence. And in this particular situation, it was a summer party, and there are children running around, and as it's time to get everybody together to celebrate their birthdays, a 4-year-old little girl comes over to her cake, and she kind of looks at it a little she just couldn't figure it all out. And you could tell that she wasn't sure what to do next. So in the background, her mom is standing in the corner. And right over here is one of our birthday enthusiasts. And she sees this little girl struggling in the moment. And so she walks over to the little girl and she says, "This is a candle. And you get to blow out this candle and make a wish." And what we realized is, as her mother is sobbing in the corner and I'm watching all of this unfold, later I have a chance to interact with them, and she said, "Mommy, they had me blow out a fire stick." Like, she had no idea what a candle was.
Wow.
There are 4 children in that family, and they were living under such oppression that they actually had never experienced any celebration, let alone their birthday celebration. And I'm so proud of the work that we do when we partner with agencies like Genesis, is that we actually celebrated all 4 of her children's birthdays, and she made a commitment that she would continue to celebrate them from then on out.
I mean, that's awesome, because the concept of a birthday party, it's something that a lot of us take for granted, something many of us celebrate every year. Some of us don't want to celebrate it as they keep getting older. But I mean, a 4-year-old who just doesn't understand that, but you were able to open her eyes to something new and amazing, and I'm sure she remembered that, so kudos to you for that. And, you know, just speaking of the problem of homelessness, this is something that really affects the Dallas community. In fact, any given night, if you go out on the streets of Dallas, you can find a couple thousand people, sleeping on the streets, and there are estimates that within the Dallas school system, there are some 3,000 children who don't have a steady home.
That's correct.
So, I mean, this just gives you an idea of how big of a problem this is, but also the impact that you're having. Let's talk about what these parties are doing for these children.
You know, if you think about it, hearing these statistics, you realize that homelessness looks a lot of different ways. It's very easy for us to attach a stigma to homelessness, right? We've heard that before. Oh, they're drug addicts, they're lazy, they don't care. What we have found is that is completely opposite. There are families that are truly doing everything that they can every single day to better their situation. And as a child, between the ages of 1 and 18 that we celebrate, imagine being bounced around from couch to couch, from school to school. I think in those moments of shuffling and probably the sense of burden that their families feel, it's very easy to get lost, right? It's very easy to just go through the motions of a day. And so what I hope that we do at the Birthday Party Project is that we allow them a chance to feel seen and to be heard, to let them know that regardless of where they sleep, regardless of what school they'll end up next, regardless of what their parent situation is, that we give them a glimpse of joy. And in those moments of joy, I feel like that is where we see and understand what is possible. And so I think that that is what I love so much about our parties, is that we get a chance to just pause for a moment throughout the nuances of our days, and we all get to come together to realize what's possible.
I think it's pretty clear in the video that we saw before that that's certainly happening. So much so, you're going beyond birthday parties now. I mean, you started here in Dallas. Now you're in 15 cities across the country. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Really growing here.
Thank
That's
you.
amazing.
Thank
Definitely
you.
deserves a round of applause.
The power of people. The power of people. It's amazing.
And beyond parties, I understand you're actually helping a young man go to college. In fact, we saw him in the video. His name is Taurus. He's 18 years old. What inspired you to get involved in his life in that way?
Exceptional human being, that Taurus. You know, what's so great about this is it actually wasn't me, it wasn't my team that recognized his potential. It was one of our volunteers that saw something in Taurus. And that's what I love so much about what we do, this opportunity to connect with one another. And she connected with him and understood that not only was he the oldest of 3 boys living in the shelter with his dad was educated, an astrophysicist by trade. He was actually, his mom left them and his dad suffers depression. It was a very difficult situation for them. As he says, we've had a lot and we've had very little, and I know that this is a season for us. So here is Taurus. At the age of 18, we give him a gift card, and he says, I'm going to use this toward my books at the community college. I just enrolled. I'm taking 2 classes. That's what I can work to afford right now, and this is what I'm going to use for my classes. So our volunteers clued into that and said, what else can we do? And if you bring something like that to our team is going to mama bear him all the way around. So we went back to Taurus and we said, Taurus, we want to support you taking classes at El Centro. How can we help? We gave him a calculator and mechanical pencils. And let me say, we gave him mechanical pencils first. And he opens the box and he takes one out and he gives the box back. We said, no, Taurus, this entire box is for you. And in that moment, I realized he was so special and that he really was going to take to heart any of the gifts that we were able to give to him. So we just rallied our troops. I'm telling you, I really do believe in the power of people. And this is a prime example of people using their gifts and their talents and their resources in ways that they may not have imagined to be able to support someone that needs it so much.
Wow, so you're nurturing their hearts and their spirits and now their minds, allowing them to continue their education.
Incredible.
That's
incredible.
Wonderful. You know, I mean, for someone to come up with an idea like the birthday party project and then to actually execute it, 2 very different things. So big kudos to you, Paige, for actually making it happen and bringing your idea, your vision to fruition. And again, congratulations for being this year's Mother of Invention.
Thank you.
Let's give Paige
Thank
another
you so
round of
much.
applause.
Thank you.
And on that note, I'd like to invite somebody else to the stage, Lisa Matarazzo, the Vice President of Vehicle Marketing and Communications at Toyota.
Thank you, Alisha. And thank you to Women of the World for your long-standing partnership with Toyota and the Mothers of Invention. By working together, our company is honored to have helped women with creativity, inspiration, and a passion for change improve society and enrich the lives of others. Our 2017 Dallas Mother of Invention is here with us today, Maxine Tuckman, whose mobility literacy app Caribou is connecting families through reading while building a strong educational foundation for children. At Toyota, our team looks for ways to inspire innovation, whether advancing technology in our fleet of vehicles, enhancing safety features, or developing new modes of personal transportation and mobility. This is in part why we embarked on a journey with the Olympic Committee and the Paralympic Committees and launched Toyota's first global initiative, Start Your Impossible. We believe that when you're free to move, anything is possible. The future of mobility is in the hands of those who really want to make society better. And that's why we're so proud to support the Toyota Mothers of Invention. These incredible women are improving lives by solving problems here in Texas and around the globe. And the impact we just heard about from our newest Mother of Invention, Paige Chenault, is truly inspiring. Since 2012, Toyota has honored 22 innovative and courageous Mothers of Invention, and tonight we welcome Paige to the family. So Paige, please join me at the podium if you will. In recognition of your remarkable work and everything that you have accomplished so far, and for inspiration to continue your work, we're delighted to present you with our Toyota Driving Solutions Grant in the amount of $50,000.
Wow. Well, there's that. Oh my gosh. Well, I didn't expect that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. We're thrilled to have you as part of the family.
You guys crying too out there? Okay.
We should have brought tissue. We congratulate you. We support you. We're absolutely thrilled to have you as part of our family and part of one of the Mothers of Invention.
Thank you so
let's
much.
have another round of applause for Paige and the Birthday Party Project.
Thank you.
That's incredible.
Australian government kept us here in this remote island for more than 3 years.
Good evening again, everyone. Well, we're here in Texas, obviously, as you know, and immigration is a story that is always in the headlines, and even more so, not just here in Texas, but around the country, as news of a caravan of thousands of people fleeing violence and economic insecurity in Central America are just weeks away from reaching the Texas-Mexico border. But I want to turn to an immigration story on the other side of the globe, in Australia. Last Thursday, the Australian government promised to remove the remaining children from its offshore detention site in Nauru. However, just the children are being moved and no adults at this time. And I want to turn to somebody who knows more about this probably than anyone, Victoria Vibekar of Save the Children. You're also a whistleblower, so thank you so much for being here. And, let's just start by a bit of location and a bit of geography. Where is Nauru and why are people being taken there from boats instead of going to Australia?
Well, Nauru is a sovereign country. It's an island in the Pacific. It's 8 square miles, so it's about 1/4 the size of the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. And it is this small island that Australia uses to house refugees and people seeking asylum, and it's part of their policy of deterrence. It is their way of preventing deaths at sea, according to the government. But what they're actually doing is they're punishing people who are fleeing violence and fleeing persecution by bringing them to these offshore centers and refusing to allow them to claim asylum in Australia. And they're using it to send a message to deter other people who are fleeing violence from trying to come to Australia by boat.
And I mentioned that you were a whistleblower. I mean, tell us a little bit about the work that you did on Nauru and what you saw.
So I worked in Nauru from 2013 to 2014 for Save the Children Australia. I was a supervisor in child protection, and my job was to protect the well-being of children, to investigate incidents of child abuse, as well as to supervise child protection workers. And what I saw was that the Australian government was actually using this holding center not to process their refugee claims, but to make their lives so difficult that they would want to return back to their countries and that they would lose all hope of a permanent future. And when I saw that going on and I saw that children were not safe and they were subjected to exploitation, they were subjected to physical and sexual assault, and the organization that I worked for was not advocating and actually telling the truth about what was actually going on in these offshore centers, I
felt morally compelled, I was ethically and morally compelled to report that abuse to the Australian Human Rights Commission.
And I mean, I think that, I speak for myself, but probably a lot of people in the audience as well, but I'm relatively shocked at this practice of indefinite detention. One doesn't imagine it would be happening in Australia. You would imagine that it would be sort of much more progressive. But now we have this news, this very recent news, just over the weekend, that Australia's government is promising to remove the children from indefinite detention. Do you think it's going to end eventually? Do you think all indefinite detention will end?
It's hard to say because Scott Morrison, who is now the Prime Minister of Australia, promised to remove children from detention in 2014, and he didn't fulfill that promise because people have still been detained on Nauru. Children, families, babies. And so now he is saying that they will plan on removing them by the end of the year with their families. But I would say, why wait? You have subjected them to this cruelty for 5 years. If you believe that children need to be removed, why aren't you removing them now? If you know that this situation is so harmful and you don't want to see them detained, he could change it with one stroke of his pen, and he's refused to for 5 years.
And, we're talking about Australia, but obviously detention is something that we're all, I think, unfortunately, more and more familiar with as the headlines of migrant children in the United States have been detained. There are more than 200 children were detained on Nauru. But, as we speak, there are more than 12,000 children currently detained in the United States. And just to get a little bit of a sense of the impact of the kind of work that you've seen and the detention on children has, I just want to play a little clip of children's drawings from inside Nauru. Obviously extremely distressing images. Can you just tell us a little bit about the emotional state of the children in Nauru?
So the children in Nauru, when I was there, they were losing hope. They were losing hope for a better future. There's no permanent resettlement in Nauru. Australian government has repeatedly said they'll never come to Australia, but has given them no other options. So what I saw was despair setting in. I saw children wanting to take their own lives. I saw families and mothers unwilling to get out of bed. And when I say bed, I meant an army stretcher in a tent is where they were detained for 5 years in a moldy tent. And I think that one of the hardest things to see was that as time went on, no matter what I provided, what type of support that myself or my colleagues provided, they became more and more despairing. They lost their will to live, and they were subjected to so much harm. For example, the sexual exploitation and sexual harassment in the detention facility was extreme. There was a young woman, a mother that I worked with, and she had a special needs child, and so she needed help from the security guards often. And what they were doing was, in exchange for that help, they were approaching her in her tent at night, asking for sexual favors from her. We found that her little boy had been outside the tent, was found without any underwear in the middle of the night, and no one could tell why. And he, with English as a second language, in an environment of fear, with a trauma, with a mom who's being sexually harassed, he was unable to tell us what had happened. But we did find out several months later that child did disclose that he had been sexually assaulted. And several months after that, he tried to take his own life. And this is a child under the age of 12. And the Australian government, knowing all of this, refused to move this family. I wrote the incident reports indicating that this woman was fearful for her safety, fearful for her son's safety. And I was told that she couldn't be moved. until she had been sexually harassed multiple times, and then maybe she could be moved to a different tent.
I mean, this sort of stuff, I mean, it's just shocking when you hear this. And again, just to reinforce that we're not talking about, you know, a country, the usual suspects that people would associate. I mean, this is Australia. But, you know, the actions of the government seem to be totally antithetical to preserving human rights. You know, the government more recently decided to eject Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, from Nauru. What was the thinking behind that decision? You know, why do you think that the Australian government are taking such a hardline approach to this particular issue?
Well, it was the Nauru government that expelled Médecins Sans Frontières, and we don't know why, what the thinking was behind it. What they publicly stated was that MSF was advocating beyond what was the scope of their position for refugees, and that they weren't supposed to be providing the type of help, mental health care, that they were. However, MSF has stated in a public statement that they were actually contracted to provide mental health care for refugees. I believe that whenever the Nauruan government believes that people are actually telling the truth about what is occurring to refugees in the detention facility and in the community, that is a threat to them. And that is a threat to the Australian government. And they do everything that they can to keep us from talking. And they have done. They have, you know, they referred me to the Australian Federal Police. They referred doctors to the Australian Federal Police.
Simply for speaking out.
For speaking out.
Wow. And, you know, journalists, I mean, you're one of the few people who's actually seen firsthand what people are experiencing on Nauru, you know, women, children, families that are being ripped apart. And it's very difficult for journalists currently to access Nauru. And it's difficult for asylum seekers as a result to actually have their voices heard. But the next clip that I want to show everybody was made by The Guardian, and it features two teenagers describing what life is like.
The detention center that we are living in Nauru is like a prison. We're living behind fences.
When it's raining, the water drips in the room and there are cockroach, mouse everywhere. It's very hot at the daytime and there was nothing for us to do.
There are lots of securities in here and they're like jailers. If they see it, they will take away our phones.
I consume washing detergents, poison. I'm just so tired of everything. It was burning all the way to summer. Everyone, including myself, we are getting hopeless.
You know, as someone who's been there, how does that affect you, you know, just sort of being taken back?
It's really hard because these are kids that I worked with or I knew, I saw in the camps. And I think what is so hard about, I know that the idea that children are going to be, and families are going to be off Nauru is an important milestone. It's an important victory. But to me, I feel so ambivalent about it. It doesn't feel worth celebrating when children are being taken off in ambulances and because they've lost the will to live. This was something that myself and my colleagues warned the government about, the mental harm, the physical harm that was being caused by detention, and they didn't listen. They could have prevented this harm. And sometimes it feels like a hollow victory.
Obviously, it's still very affecting to you, you know, even as we sit here talking so many thousands of miles away. It must be very hard when you hear people like the former, you know, Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott talk about the fact that he thinks that the conditions on Nauru are, quote, very pleasant, is what he said just over the weekend, actually last week. I mean, what's your reaction to you know, one of the foremost politicians in Australian politics saying that the conditions that we just saw in that video are very pleasant?
Well, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott was one of the chief jailers of these people. And I think he has lost He doesn't see them as people. He sees them as less than. That is the only thing that I can think of as why someone would say they're pleasant, because these are not conditions that he would accept for his own children. We all know this. We hold people that come from other countries and flee violence and refugees. Somehow, many people in the US and many people in Australia, and foremost the current government, they have a different standard for what is acceptable for their own families and what is acceptable for people fleeing violence. And I would say, what makes your children worth protecting and somebody else's children unworthy of that protection?
And does it, I mean, in terms of this idea of the policy of deterrence in general, you know, this is something that isn't remote, isn't just in Australia, as we've been talking about, but, you know, it's here in the United States. The Trump administration has been very aggressive in rolling out deterrence policies, whether it be, you know, Attorney General Sessions removing asylum seekers who've been victims of domestic violence from actually being able to now apply for asylum. You know, that there has been this very, very strong policy of deterrence, obviously most poignantly and potently with child separation as a policy. What does the policy of deterrence actually do to children?
The policy of deterrence is something that punishes people for seeking protection, and what it does is it destroys hope. We take children and families and we use them as examples to other people to say, don't do this because this will happen to you, and we hold them up as examples of punishment. And what it does is it breaks down their spirit. So we see in Nauru now, it's come to such a crisis that we have kids with what is coined traumatic withdrawal syndrome or resignation syndrome, where kids have lost the will to live, many of them, so they stop feeding themselves, they stop toileting, they've taken to their bed, they're unresponsive, they don't talk, they don't communicate with their caregivers, with medical personnel. They need help. They need help to toilet, they need to be hydrated through a tube. This is what deterrence does over time. And allowing children to lose hope and allowing them and putting them in a position where they see their families lose hope, when they see their parents commit or try to attempt suicide or self-harm, or the adults around them in the detention facility do that, kids get their sense of security and safety from their loved ones, so much of it. And when that is destroyed, piece by piece by piece, when their mental health is broken down, it causes so much long-term damage to people. And you can imagine what it does to adults as well. When adults aren't able to protect their own children and they're not able to feel that they can offer their children hope of a better future, of a safe future.
Well, we know that, you know, there is going to be some sort of forward momentum on this issue. Australia has already resettled some of the children and some of the adults, and more than 100 of them actually are living here in the United States, some of them in Texas. But it's estimated that there are 70 million refugees worldwide. What, if anything, can our audience do? You know, I think there's a sense of helplessness often when we hear these stories. What can our audience do? What can we do to express support for all asylum seekers and refugees?
Well, I think first let me tell you a story about an asylum seeker I met, so you know the type of people I'm talking about. This man adopted a daughter on his boat journey, and the boat capsized, and instead of letting her go, he threw her overboard, and then he carried her on his shoulders for 14 hours, waiting for rescue. And this man has adopted her as his daughter, and he remains in Nauru. Instead of being called a hero, someone we would love in our communities, instead, he is being detained for over 5 years. And I think it's so important to tell politicians that you do not accept the policy of deterrence and family separation. It's been 5 years that we have been fighting for the tide to turn with the Australian government, and it has finally started to turn, and it's because of public pressure. So I would say, do not let your politicians get off this. Do not let what happened in Australia happen here. You have the largest detention facility in the country in Dili, and there are all sorts of human rights abuses that have been reported there. Get on the phone and contact your politicians, write them letters, and don't stop.
Hear, hear. Well, I think we can all get on board with that. Thank you so much, Victoria, for speaking out, for your bravery, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've come to ask me to marry you, haven't you?
I'm overwhelmed because you're like my favorite author of all time and you're actually standing here.
Welcome to Isabel Allende.
Thank you.
A dream weaver of stories, a conjurer of extraordinary worlds. It's really an honor to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
So you've said once that you can teach somebody to write, but you can't teach storytelling, right? So what makes a great storyteller?
I think it's a good ear for stories. Some people have a good ear for music, and they can create music or play music. And some people have a good ear for jokes. Those guys that can tell a joke and have the sense of pause, and they do it perfectly, I can't. But, and I can't even remember the jokes. But a story, when someone tells me something, it somehow gets ingrained in my brain, and it stays there, and it sort of ferments, and eventually it comes out in some way. And I think that the whole secret of storytelling is to tell just enough to capture the reader or the audience's imagination and work with that. Don't give too much too soon. Wait. Dickens said, make them laugh, make them cry, but above all, make them wait.
And that teasing it out.
Yes.
Teasing it out.
Well, it's like, in love.
Yes.
It's the same thing in love. You tease the guy, you tease him, and then at some point, you get him.
Like in your trap.
When he's totally distracted, you get him.
So here's a memorable Allende quote. Nice people don't make interesting characters. They only make good former spouses. So I feel there's just a weight of worlds in that sentence. So can you explain what you were thinking when you said that?
Well, my stepfather always complained that he was never in my stories, but he has common sense. And a person with common sense is boring most of the time. So you want someone who is crazy, extreme, original in some way. And that's the kind of people that do not make good spouses or former spouses. You want someone with common sense for the former husband. I have several, so that's why I can't.
Yes, I know. You're quite an aficionado of former husbands.
Yeah.
So your first novel, The House of the Spirits, was published in 1982, and you were breaking into Latin America's very male-dominated literary world. You became a journalist before you were a novelist, and you've really remained sort of a woman of the arena ever since. You've had great confidence in your life to sort of keep driving forward. What gave you that confidence?
No, I didn't have any confidence. I was just desperate. I lived in a Catholic, patriarchal, authoritarian, conservative family in Chile. Can you imagine? It was like the Middle Ages. So just out of despair, I tried to get out of there and do something different. And I was, as a kid, I had this anger inside that I couldn't explain why I had it or what it was. until I stumbled upon feminism. But that was in my late teens.
And that spoke to you and liberated your...
Yeah, I realized that I was not totally crazy, that there were other people like that in the world, and there was a language to express it and a movement and books written about it. I remember my mom. My mom she just died. My mother was a lady, an old-fashioned lady. And when I came up with these ideas of feminism, she said, I totally understand. I totally share your point of view. But can you do it discreetly? You don't have to be shouting. Don't tell people. And I said, but Mother, how are you going to change the world if you keep quiet? And she said, well, let other people do it.
And so your rebellion then you just decided to surge
I just
ahead.
couldn't stop myself.
You couldn't stop yourself. Your mother was very, very important to you, wasn't she? And
She was. She still is, actually.
She still, and she said that her mantra was, just keep walking, nothing lasts forever, the nature of life is change. She was such a powerful presence in your life, and now that she's gone, can you talk to us a little bit about what she has meant to you?
Well, I lived separated from my mother most of my life. I was 15 when we were separated for the first time. And we seldom lived in the same continent, but we wrote to each other every day. At the beginning, letters would come in the mail, and she was living, for example, in Turkey in the 50s, 60s.
Because your father was a diplomat.
Yeah, and so the letters would take a month to arrive. So it wasn't a conversation, it was an ongoing monologue. But we kept writing, and then later they moved to Argentina, so the mail was a little faster, and then the faxes came out. And we started faxing each other like crazy because that was like a conversation. But we didn't know that faxes in time are totally blurred and erased, so we lost that period. And then we started emailing, and I have kept the first letters, the faxes, the emails for more than 40 years. And at the end of the year, I put them in a plastic box, mark the year, and it goes in a storage room. I have a storage room full of boxes, and each box has between 600 and 800 letters.
Wow.
So I have all of my mother's life in front of me, and she was 20 years older, so I could always see where I would be in 20 years. She was opening the way, showing me the way. Mm-hmm. And being a very different person from me, we got along. Maybe because we didn't live close.
Did she have Did she have anything of your own literary gift? Was she a writer herself?
I think she would have been a wonderful writer if she would have been born later. Yeah. But in her generation, she was somebody's spouse.
Well, letters were also, have always been a very important thing in your life, and letters were also the basis for one of your most personal books, which I happen to love one of the most, Paula, it's called, when it's named for your daughter, who of course passed away at the age of 29 from a rare blood disorder. Many people really never recover from the loss of a child. How were you able to live through that devastating experience, and how did you find a way to survive the loss of Paula?
I never wanted to get over it, and I never wanted to forget what had happened or to, in a way, it's a sort of beautiful sadness that you always carry with you under the skin. And it's ready to emerge any minute. I see a young woman in jeans with a ponytail and a white linen shirt, and it's Paula. And so it comes and goes, but it makes me a better person, more patient and tolerant. And my mother said a couple of important things when Paula died. She said, as you mentioned, she said, this kind of grief you have to live it. There's no Prozac, no vacations in Hawaii, no therapy, nothing will help. You just have to go through it. It's a long and dark tunnel that you have to walk alone. Just keep walking. One day at a time, one step at a time, and you will find light at the end. I promise there is light, but it will take a while. And the other thing she said is, the worst already happened. Nothing else will happen in your life that will be even comparable. So if you survive this, you will survive anything. And she was right. Recently, well, not so recently, almost 3 years ago, I divorced my husband after 28 years of marriage. At the time, I was 72. So I thought, okay, the rest of my life I'm alone. And people were sort of telling me how horrible this was, why I had made this decision. Wasn't it better to just stay in something that wasn't that great, but it was worse to be alone? For me, it wasn't even 10% of what had happened before. I didn't even cry. So maybe I'm dry. I don't know what happened to me, but I thought it was a joyful experience, the divorce.
But you know, in some ways, what you also are brilliant at doing is you kind of write your way out of tragedy and you write your way through disaster. I mean, you sat down and you wrote this extraordinary moving book, Paula, about your daughter.
Yeah, that was my way. My way of walking the tunnel was word by word. And I picked up all the letters that I had written to my mother during the long year of Paula's agony. And I could read them in chronological order and realize what had happened and accept it and live with it.
Yeah.
So the book really helped me, but it also helped other people. Because I wrote this book more than 20 years ago, and I still get letters from people who are either reading it now for the first time, or they read it a long time ago and something happens now that reminds them of the book. So I get the most touching, most wonderful letters.
Being in exile has been a very sort of formative thing, obviously, for you as a writer. And you fled Chile after your cousin Salvador Allende was toppled from the presidency in a coup, and you then lived in Venezuela in political exile, and you eventually moved to California. Do you think that experience of being sort of banished from your own home has been the key thing in your life?
One of the important crossroads, let's say. There are moments in my life when things have happened that are completely out of my control, that have sort of moved my life in an unexpected direction. I wouldn't be a writer today if I had not gone through the experience of being an exile, a political refugee, because I had to cut away from everything that was familiar and dear to me. No one does that just because. You do it because you're running for your life. So when I hear about all this rhetoric about refugees, it breaks my heart. People don't put themselves in the place of a person who is running away from everything they love because they're desperate, because they're running for their lives. So in my case, I think that I was almost paralyzed by a feeling of loss and nostalgia when I was living the first few years in Venezuela, until I wrote The House of the Spirits, which was a crazy attempt to recover everything that I had lost, to put in that book everything. I think that Bertolt Brecht said in one occasion, "I am that man that carries around a brick to show the world how his house was." And in a way, I think The House of the Spirits was my brick, to tell the world, well, this is everything that was and isn't anymore. And that made me a writer, gave me a voice, and changed my life completely. So it wasn't all bad what happened.
Right.
And then I became an immigrant, and the experience is completely different. Because a refugee is someone who is always looking back, looking at the past, wanting to return. The average time a refugee spends away from their home is 17 years. By the time they can go back, their children won't, because they are already citizens of another place. So it's a very lonely and devastating experience. But I didn't go through that, because by the time I could return to Chile, I was an immigrant in the United States, because I had fallen in love with this man that I so happily divorced recently. So, what were we talking about?
We were being an immigrant. So the main character in your latest book, In the Midst of Winter, which I thoroughly recommend and which you can buy afterwards, which Isabel has kindly said she will sign, she's called Evelyn Ortega, and she's a young, undocumented immigrant in the US who's fled gang violence in Guatemala. It's extraordinarily vivid in the backtracking of her life. When you look at that immigrant caravan, now that we keep hearing about? Are you thinking about Evelyn Ortega?
Of course.
You know, what are you thinking when you're looking at it?
I have a foundation that I created after my daughter died because I wanted to do something to honor her. And the foundation works trying to help and empower women and girls. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we have been focusing on refugees because it's a worldwide drama, tragedy that the world is living. And why is it a tragedy now that everybody's talking about it? Because for the first time, the refugees are knocking the doors of Europe. Refugees have been in the world, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, always. But now that they're coming to Europe, now it's a problem. And in the United States, we are talking about a caravan of families and people who are running away from the gangs, the narcos, corruption, extreme poverty, and all this is described in my book because it's one of the cases we have in the foundation. She's like one of the many refugees we know. So the tragedy is so difficult to describe without going overboard, because in literature, in fiction, the first duty of the writer is to make the story believable. And sometimes reality is not. And if I had described exactly what happened, how they killed the brothers, I would have turned away my readers. They would not have believed what the kind of violence and brutality that these people confront every day. So I had to tone it down. Isn't that awful?
That's incredible. That is incredible. That
Yeah.
in fiction you had to make it more palatable.
More palatable so that people will believe that it is true.
Well, that's incredible, that piece of information. So you said that there are no indiscreet questions, only indiscreet answers, right? So that, of course, makes me ask you about your love life, because you give many teasers. Typical of the great storyteller, she's teased it out. Right? She's mentioning this divorce, which she's so happy about. She's teasing us to ask the killer question, right? Which is, tell us about the new man in your life, because it's a very romantic story, how you actually came together.
I tried Match.com, but actually, what can I write in my profile? 73-year-old short Latino grandmother looks for a partner? What would happen? What do you think? So it didn't work. I didn't get one reply, nothing. So I decided, okay, I'm going to live with my dog. I have a very cute dog. And I bought a very tiny house with 1 bedroom and a bed big enough for the dog and me. And I was very happy with that new situation. But apparently, I said this in NPR in some program, and a man who is a lawyer in New York was driving to Boston, and he heard me on the radio, and he didn't like what he heard. He thought, how come that this intelligent woman that wrote those books can say this stupid thing? I mean, she's really stupid. So he wrote to my office, and my assistant very kindly and very politely replied. And then he wrote again the next day, and then I picked up and I replied. And he started writing every single day, every morning and every evening for 5 months.
Wow.
And the only person who has been so consistent in their writing is my mother. So I thought this guy must have some qualities of my mother. And after 5 months, I went for a gala of Planned Parenthood in New York, and I decided to meet him. I went with all my team, 7 people. And I said, okay, I'm going to meet this guy, so you disappear. I had some speech somewhere. So you disappear. There was a long stairway. And he was waiting for me downstairs, and the 7 members of my team were standing on the stairs with the phones, taking pictures. So it was a very humiliating moment. And the guy invited me out for lunch the next day. And I was sitting there in the restaurant thinking, what am I doing here? Tomorrow I have to go back to California. This is not leading anywhere. So I said, look, what are your intentions? Because I'm 73 years old, I don't have any time to waste. So he choked on the ravioli. And I felt so humiliated because I thought, okay, I got up and I left. But he caught me in the street. To make a long story short, he sold his house, gave away everything he had, all his possessions, except 2 bikes, some clothes, and for some reason, some crystal glasses. And he moved to my house. So now we are the dog, me and him in this tiny house with 1 bedroom. And it's really working beautifully. So my advice for the ladies in the room is that you always take the initiative. Always. Don't wait.
Well, I mean, I love this story because it's just about never losing sight of passion, however old you are. And one of the things that is so taboo right in the United States, it seems, is for women to be able to age in public. You know, they have to conceive it, they have to deny it, they have to have plastic surgery, they have to pretend there's something.
Oh, I had plastic surgery.
When you have plastic surgery.
Yeah.
But why do you think America...
Do you think I would look this good without plastic surgery? No. Takes a lot of money.
A lot of money. So why do you think America has such a problem with aging?
I don't know, but it's a very
What's
American
the secret?
thing.
Tell us. I mean, you've obviously
in America,
beaten it.
you have to be successful, you have to be young, and if possible, you have to be thin.
But you've managed to beat this entire sort of cultural
No, I'm not
attitude.
fat.
You're not fat.
Yeah.
But you just have gone on, you know, being yourself and meeting this fantastic guy and having this huge success. It's a great package, let's face it. I mean, you've managed to do it all.
Well, I have been very lucky. That's the truth. Because the guy could have been a serial killer. I mean, you never know. You never know. I have friends who have met serial killers, so it could have been my case. I was lucky.
So now the Me Too movement here in the US. I mean, what are your thoughts about that, about where that is going? And do you think that Me Too could ever finally obliterate the machismo culture of Latin America, and Central America, which is the most, you know,
the worst in the world. I don't know if it's the worst in the world, but it's pretty bad.
I think the statistics are the worst in the world.
Pretty bad. Well, the Me Too movement, you know, 2 weeks ago I was with Anita Hill. And 25 years ago, the first person who denounced harassment in the workplace was Anita Hill. And she got all the aggression, and she was humiliated. And Clarence Thomas was elected appointed in the court. But what she planted, that seed, has been essential to support this movement and many other things that have happened because of that. Harassment in the workplace became an issue in the United States, even if she lost in that instance. And it extended to the world, to Chile, to every other country. People talked about it for the first time. And the same thing is happening today with the Me Too movement. Whatever is achieved is a seed that is planted and will germinate in time. And I think that now it takes less time because communication is so much better. We are better informed and connected than we were 25 years ago.
Well, in your book, Paula, you talk about having an experience with a fisherman when I think you were 8 years old.
Yeah, but that was different from this, because that was, I think that the Me Too movement and what happened to Anita Hill is worse because it's a person in power who takes advantage of someone who doesn't have the power to defend herself. In my case, it was a fluke. I was a child, and I was almost raped by a fisherman. He wasn't in a position of power. He was a poor guy, uneducated, who just tried to do something that was, he would have lost his freedom if he would have been caught. Or if my grandfather would have caught him, he would have killed him. So, but it's not the same with people who are working for someone and are subjected to that.
Do you feel that it could make a difference at some point in your, you know, in
Chile? It's very powerful. It has really picked up the Me Too movement, and especially among young women. And it is, as I said, extended. It's happening in many places. And of course, when I was young and I was fighting for feminism, I thought that it was such a rational, fair struggle that in a matter of a decade, maybe 10 years max, the world would have changed. We would have ended the patriarchy. Everything would have changed. And look, more than 50 years have gone by and we are still there, but things have progressed. It's not the same world.
Well, your books have been translated into 42 languages and sold almost 71 million copies. And every January the 8th, you start writing a new book. Can you tell us what the next book is about? Or?
I don't have a next book. Do you have any ideas? We're already in November, for God's sake.
But this happens every single year.
No, some years I do have some idea, and then I start researching. And for this book, in the midst of winter, I didn't have an idea in December, and we had rented a house, a brownstone, in Brooklyn. And then I didn't have any ideas, and people started giving me ideas, and that's how the book came to be. So if you have any ideas,
so what's the story that
speak
you,
up.
What is the story you most want to tell that you haven't told?
I would like to tell that my mother's story. I promised her I wouldn't. But I might break the promise because she's not here anymore. I have to
and
wait.
You have all those boxes.
Yeah, I have the boxes, and I have to wait until my stepfather dies. I'm counting the days. He's 102. He's 102, and he may live like 5 more years. So
you'll get to it.
Yeah,
I have absolutely no doubt.
I always said that I would write an erotic novel after my mother died because that would have killed her. But now I'm too old.
Now you're living an erotic novel, so what does it matter?
You wish.
So,
you wish.
Okay. Isabella Lendi, you are an amazing and fabulous woman.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, my God.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone who's been on our stage tonight because they were all just in their own way amazing. First up, our generous presenting sponsor, Toyota's co-host, Lisa Matarazzo. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you to AT&T and our supporting partner, Elevate. Thank you so much to you as well. And of course, again, all of you, anyone who wants to come to our 10th anniversary, April the 10th to the 12th at Lincoln Center in New York. The information is on our website for tickets. It's going to be incredible, a really epic summit this year. So we very much hope that you'll join us. And now what I hope most of all is that you'll come outside and have a drink, pass food, talk to Isabel, sign books, talk to Minyon and Leah, who also sign books. We're all there and we're going to have a great time. So thank you very much indeed for coming.